Hello, Jake. On a very, very,
Hello.
very slow news week. I'm glad that we're not at all going to cover a sample return mission from the far side of the moon, an epic heat shield re-entry today, and a first crewed launch of a new spaceship. So
it's been a light week, yeah.
Yeah, Matt of Iridium, welcome. The Iridium boss, as referred to on Twitter. Let's talk about satellite networks. Let's do it.
I'm glad to talk about the moon or anything else here.
Maybe we need to bring back turning count, Jake.
Put a network there. But good to see you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Should we do it? Can we get like the 5-minute Matt Desch take on the news this week? What are you excited about, and what are you surprised by?
Well, I watched the launch this morning of Starship. That was pretty cool. I mean, that was very successful. But yeah, there's a little bit of everything going on this week, isn't there? I mean,
a sample return mission from the far side of the moon was basically forgotten about by the news threads this week. That's how much stuff is going on.
Yeah, and Starliner finally getting up there. I didn't get a chance to watch that, but I saw that made it up yesterday. I heard there was a helium leak or something. I don't know. Has that been resolved? I haven't been able to follow.
No, they didn't resolve it, but they did add 2 more. So
it's a lot of helium leaks.
There you go. No, space is happening right now.
It is. Yeah. Cool. Drinks. Should we start off the show a little bit here?
Mm-hmm.
Our normal thing. Matt, were you able to bring something fun to drink?
Well, I follow directions, so you guys told me to. I'm in the office, which you would think would be dry, but after 18 years being Iridium boss, every partner, employee, friend has sent me. This place is a veritable alcohol. I have gin. I have sake from Japan. I have stuff from Air Force, Jeremiah Weed. I got wine back here, but I decided, in honor of the Starship launch this morning, I would pick one of the beers that SpaceX gave me.
Whoa, look at this.
It's a chocolate milk stout. It says Beeridium. I think they customized this for me here. So this is Beeridium. Happy holidays from your CFO ho ho. So it must be from Brent.
Wow.
I don't know. But anyway, it's actually pretty good. I think it's been there a couple of years, but on my shelf. But I think I did make it cold, and it's actually quite good. So
that's pretty dark for a summertime drink. I like it.
Yeah, chocolate beer stout. Isn't that dark? That looks like engine oil.
It does. It totally does.
I love it.
Tastes a little bit better than engine oil, but not much.
I'm very boring today. I'm keeping it real simple. Look at this.
Wow. Corona Extra.
Yeah, in a can though was a mistake. I will not buy Corona in a can.
I didn't even know you could get that way.
Yeah, honestly. I don't know why I thought can's fine. And I just got this. They're only okay, but I'll put it in a glass.
Usually Tecate out of the can.
Yeah, usually I'll only do Tecate out of the can.
I'm still I'm rocking the Vernaccia still from San Gimignano. Look at that this is a great little label. This one's very delicious. So it's a nice white wine for the summer.
All right. Well, cheers, everybody.
Yeah.
Who knows what I'll say now? This is going to be great.
Now you've uncovered the point of the show.
Yeah. We wait till like 30 minutes in, and then we start asking the really hard-hitting questions after everything's got through.
We should start with what is up in the world of Iridium lately, because this is a topic I was going to bring up later in the show, but I joked to Jake that you have done the full life cycle. If you were to go on like r/SpaceX on Reddit, right? You were like hero of the SpaceX story in the early days as the Iridium Next launches were going, and now you've cycled over to like a SpaceX competitor in the era of Starlink, right? And you've completed the hero's journey in that essence. So
I don't think we've gone to villain or anything at this point.
Not quite. But there's room for the journey still.
Yeah, that's. I mean, when you said what's up, it's not our stock price right now, and that's not because of anything we did. We're still growing and successful, but absolutely every time Starlink launches, everybody figures Leo is Leo, and so it must be hurting everybody else, and so it's hurting us, and it really isn't. But it'll take a few more quarters or another year or so before people realize what we do is very different than Starlink. Our businesses have never been alike. They've focused on supplying big broadband to dishes and customers. We've focused on portability, mobility, small things, small satellite, small devices. Even as they move into what's called direct-to-device, and we're doing that too, but we're doing it a very different way. In fact, in many ways, I think we're going to be viewed as a companion to what they do, which is called supplemental communications from space, or using terrestrial spectrum. So, they're covering 4 to 5% of the planet, with their service, and we cover the other 100%. We're not doing the same thing. We're offering sort of more of a safety backup SMS kind of solution so that phones can work well anywhere on the planet. And that's what we've always done. We've been sort of a companion to other capabilities, and we're going to be that way to Starlink. So I don't still see them as anything but friends. I am thankful for the incredible launches that put my network into space, and I'm looking forward to someday using Starship and other things to launch the next generation one. So
we could make a big Iridium satellite to fit in a Starship. That's exciting. We could get Iridium flares back.
They'll probably be smaller next time around, but yes. I actually have an Iridium flare beer. I should have got that one cold here, but anyway.
I have an Iridium flare story. Can I tell you the story?
Absolutely. It's the 6th-year anniversary of the Iridium, I saw. So we honor our flare community here every year and thank them for. But yes, we don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'm asking permission because this is a story about how I was very disappointed by one. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
All right, okay.
He told me he had a story for you, and I had no prep for what this is. I cannot wait. I don't know that I've ever heard this story.
So I was at an event, like a barbecue outside backyard kind of thing, beers and hot dogs kind of the story. And it was like in the evening, and I was with a whole bunch of space people, like people who would totally appreciate an Iridium flare. And I had my little app that was telling me, like, you put in your coordinates and it's like, you're going to get one at 7:42 or whatever when it just hits the light, right? And I was like, oh, this is gonna be so great. We're here, we're gonna see it where we are. So I'll like gather all my friends up, and we're all like standing on one side of the yard to look like over the house in the direction it's gonna be, and waiting, and it never came. It just did not happen. I don't know what it was. and so I had all these people just standing up for nothing, and I lost so much cred that day, because of an Iridium flare.
That happened to me too, to be honest with you. I actually had a board member. I was out at this thing, and I told everybody. They marched out of the lodge and out there, and I go, it'll go there. Oh no, it's not happening. And but the first time I saw one, I mean, I know today it's not a big deal. We see satellites all the time. There's 6,000 of them up there. But I mean, the first time after a couple years, and given the life and death situation it was for our company for a long time there, whether we were going to survive and stuff, you can imagine it was life-changing the first time I saw one. I mean, it was so, I knew my team had worked like hell to keep that thing alive. It was supposed to only last 6 to 7 to 8 years, and here I'm in year 14, and how many more years could it give us? Turned out we got almost 20 plus years out of those satellites, and so every time we saw one in space, we celebrated it, and frankly, I do miss the flare community. I made some great friends. You guys saw the people online who would tweet great pictures of them from locations, and I have some dear friends that I've developed from just meeting people who cared about the same thing we did. So yeah, I miss them too.
They were cool.
I got a good one. I got a good one. I don't remember where I was or when it was, but I know I saw one, and it was like there were two satellite or spacecraft viewings that I've been blown away by. One was the Iridium flare. The other one was when Tiangong 1 was on its way back in, and I got a good viewing of it, and the relative speed was so blisteringly fast because of how low it was that I was like, blown away by that. But those are the two that stood out to me for sure.
But it does. It connects you to space. It connected people to something that was, man-made, put up there. Fortunately, there's a lot of them still up there. That's the thing. Concerning we could get a debris and stuff like that. But at our altitude, which is only 485 miles or 785 kilometers, it's 120 years for those things to naturally deorbit, and that's really low. You can imagine it's over 1,000 years if you're up a little higher. And so those things, got to get them out of space. We were able to get all the previous generation stuff out of space that we could and got them out quickly. That was important so that they didn't cause other mayhem in the future. But it is, they were cool to see.
Yeah, I always loved it. Like,
don't mind that they don't see them anymore because they got plenty of Starlinks that they have to look through now.
I always just love that. Like, anytime you see a satellite from space, it has such a different feel because, like, normally you're used to either like fixed things, stars that aren't moving, or like we have airplanes. But airplanes are doing all this kind of like atmospheric stuff, so they're kind of jittery, and the lights are always flashing. So it's very like animated, right? And I always feel like the satellites are just very graceful, like whether it's the ISS or a flare, it's kind of just like a nice constant speed, always, just so smooth. And even with a flare, the light's always like slowly on and then slowly off, like it's very, very smooth and like it's just like a really high resolution, smooth experience. That's what I always love about the satellite.
Something clock-like about the rate that comes across the sky. Yeah.
I was told, when they launched the satellites in 1997, it was a surprise that they flared. There was nothing in low Earth orbit at the time when we first launched, right? So other than some spy satellites, and nobody knew about them or talked about them. So when we launched it, it was like some people were kind of freaked out by the whole thing, and they had to kind of compute what that was. And then they suddenly realized it was the main mission antennas off of our satellites, and then they could compute them. And then everybody got kind of excited about what that is. But that was the first time we really ever kind of connected in some way to something in space. And I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, when you look at the like eras of history that Iridium has spanned, where, you're talking about the near-death experiences first time around, the whole deployment of Iridium Next, when you were deploying what at the time felt like an absolutely massive constellation to deploy in, I forget what the original launch campaign was. Was it like a year and a half or something? It was pretty quick, right?
Yeah, it was actually about a year.
Just a year, okay.
It was even less than a year, I think.
And it was, now my numbers are going, it was like 80-something, right? 80?
Yeah, there were...
88?
There were more than that. It was 66 operational satellites. I know when I got here in 2006, there were still like 15 in space, but I think they must have launched 85 to 90 or something like that.
Yeah. And at the time, it was like, wow, this is a lot of satellites to go up in just a year, right? And then here we are, and there were 2,000 active satellites then, and we're at 6 or whatever now. So there's been just these eras that Iridium has lived through. What do you kind of like draw out of that storyline from the late 90s to now as notable things that have happened in the industry?
Well, you're right. It has been kind of a roller coaster. It's, a story of survival and eventual success. I've told the story before, but I used to say we were, everybody was amazed how successful we are now, but it was like, no, we're like that starlet that finally comes on and gets the, Oscar, and they call her an overnight success story. And she's only been, toiling for 30 years, and then suddenly people realize who she is. And that's a little bit the way it's been. The first time around, we were the Starlink of our area, right? We were unprecedented to put satellites in low Earth orbit. And during the 90s, it was the early days of wireless communications, and there wasn't, global roaming, and it was the amount of money they threw at advertising and stuff like that. This was our predecessors at Motorola and the like. But it was really it was the first time anybody like focused on something that would really bring the whole world together. It was a globalization kind of thing, which obviously, you want to talk about another era that's passed, we're now very nationalized and stuff. But at the time, we were the poster child for globalization, right? I mean, this was going to be one phone for humanity, one area code for the planet, that kind of stuff. And it was pretty exciting. And then it wasn't. And then it was the biggest bankruptcy in history, followed, fortunately, by Enron a week later, which took him out of the press, I guess, a couple of weeks later. And then it was sort of a slow period. And, frankly, there were a bunch of other bankruptcies, and, satellite systems and frankly space systems have not been all that successful. There was almost 10 years where it was like the nuclear winter in the industry. I marked the next phase sort of with skybox imaging, not a normal one people think about, but that was one that first time, people put small satellites in space to do something that they didn't know could be done with small satellites. And, with Google bought them, for like 6 times the amount they invested, suddenly there was money pouring in. And of course, the common theme through all that's been SpaceX. And a lot of people, think the whole industry is, and in some ways it is. SpaceX is sort of an anomaly in our industry, but there hasn't been lots of other successes. So, quite certainly not like that, and unlikely to be quite like that. So, there was a lot of investment poured in. Suddenly, all these constellations, lots of LEOs are being launched, but still not a lot of success, not financial success. You can't really point to anybody in the industry, frankly, except us. And it took us over 30 years to get here, that is growing and generating cash and is, got, returning money to shareholders, all that kind of stuff. And, so things in space take like 30 years to be successful. And yet everybody's hoping for an overnight success story, and it's just not, it doesn't work that way. So I do think there have been cycles. We've been part of a lot of them. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary in service, but a lot of that's just, it's been survival until we finally got to where we are today.
I think there's like an interesting kind of tidbit that I can pull from that too, because even some of the like newer, I'll say quote unquote newer successes, companies that haven't been around that long as compared to you guys, like they're successful, but if you look at the balance sheets and stuff, like it's still a financial struggle. Like a lot of them are still running, deficits to innovate and grow and all that kind of thing. We did like a show, I feel like it's like a year ago now, but it wasn't that long ago, where we were looking at, we were just pulling up like random public companies and seeing like, how are they doing? Like, let's look at the dollars, right? And like there was a bunch of surprises for us, because all these companies that we thought were like doing really well were still like losing money every quarter, because they were trying to get, things to invest. And that sort of, you can't quite be that a long-term rock that's like stable that quickly in space. I don't think it's possible yet,
No. And the timelines are very long in space. I'm amazed at everything that you get excited about. If there's a new, you can think of a couple companies right now today which are sort of seem hot, and they're all talking about being in service in 2026, and it's going to be 2030, before you can really use service, or 2031. And yet you can't blame them, because who would be interested if if it didn't turn around? So things still take a long time. They cost a lot more. We still use things like first cost. We always talk about a constellation costing X million dollars, but that's only what it costs for the first 3 to 5 years. You have to spend that same amount every 5 years. I mean, one of the things we did was built a network that can last 15 to 20 years. So at least, but the numbers don't look good because it was $3 billion, but we didn't, could have been $1 billion network done 3 times by that time by others. It's things are hard in space, but once you finally get there, they can be quite lucrative. You just got to survive to get there.
Yeah. One of the ways that SpaceX is the outlier of the industry is the one competitor in the space that also can launch their own stuff, and that's always talked about. And we compare it to the way that Amazon has to roll out Kuiper and buy every available launch vehicle from here to the ends of Earth over the next 3 years to do it. As someone that was in that boat, going out and buying a whole bunch of Falcon 9s back in the day before everyone else was buying Falcon 9s, how does that how do you do that math internally to figure out, obviously you have a longer replacement cycle like you're talking about, but is that part of that equation that hey, we don't have our own rockets, so we have to budget these things differently, so we need things to last longer, so we don't have to buy launches every couple years? Or do you kind of just see it as like yet another expense that goes into the business, the business line items that you need?
So when we were, I joined the company in 2006, so it was a few years old at the time, and really it was to rebuild the network that I knew would age, and figure out how to get it financed and launched and all that sort of thing. And we were constrained. I mean, we had a fast growing business, but it was not going to generate enough cash to replace the network, and so we were on a budget. And I would have loved to have built a rocket in the meantime there to launch my network. that was impractical. So when we went out and said what's available, and it was Ariane, and it was Atlas, and it was still a few Deltas around, et cetera. And then this SpaceX company, which still was playing around with the Falcon 1 at the time. Falcon 9 was only on the drawing board. And I know the team kind of came and said, we really think these guys are going to be successful. Let's take a look at it. I'll get to the answer to the question. But it was kind of, I said, we have to finance this thing, I mean, who's gonna put money against this? But in the end, we took a chance. I'm glad we did. It wasn't as big a chance as you might think it was, because I often remind people, the deal with SpaceX was about like $450 million, a little bit more, for 8 rockets at the time. Turned out we ended up getting 9. But the next best deal I had was like 1.2 billion. So it was kind of okay, as long as we had some off ramps. But we believed and we worked together. Remember, our first launch was the first launch right after the the launch pad, the last failure they had on the launch pad.
Yeah,
the Amos 6 one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it gives you an idea what my state of mind was in our first launch.
Dialing up to get the extra 800 million that you needed.
A lot more of these, I think, at that time. I know at the time.
Yeah,
but when you said we didn't really have the alternative to kind of go do it. In fact, my head of operations, when I came to the company, and I wasn't a satellite space guy. I came from a telecom industry, long technology background in telecom, and while I loved aerospace and everything, this was sort of new. But he said, we're going to do it just like we did before. We'll contract it all out and build it ourselves. And I knew there was no way at our size and scope at that point we could do it. So we needed to buy satellites. We needed to buy rockets. SpaceX was one of the first companies to kind of completely vertically integrate, end to end. And I think everybody has tried to follow them. I mean, if you look at everybody else now, almost, whether it's Rocket Lab or Relativity or, on the satellite side, you saw OneWeb do it and build their own satellites. Everybody's doing that. And I think it almost has maybe gone a little too far the other direction, because you have people doing things that they'll not be able to scale and, for the next 20, 30 years necessarily, especially if you're launching a constellation. I mean, can you really build something that will stay going? So I don't know. Next time around, did we pick 15, 20 years? No, that was what the life cycle of geostationary satellites were. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to build a LEO, why wouldn't you kind of pick the same kind of timeline? It was after we launched, or after we designed Next, this small sat craze kind of started, where people started saying, I can use commercially off-the-shelf parts really cheaply. The satellites won't last long, but we can make them so much cheaper that so what if they last 4 to 5 years? I think that's gone too far that way too, and I wouldn't be surprised if even Starlink and other people, Kuiper, don't start eventually building into their generations longer lasting satellites, because technology, the services aren't changing that dramatically over that period of time, at least not not if you're just doing broadband, or not just if you're taking pictures from space, or not if you're just doing space situational awareness. That's not changing that rapidly, and you really want to, if you're not generating cash, this is a basic business concept. You have to eventually generate cash.
You're so old school, Matt.
I know, it's crazy.
That's not how we do it these days.
We don't do that, our generation. We just VC our way to death. Yeah.
I'm an anomaly. I know that's big here on this station here, and I guess that's I am.
It was you tweeting. We were wondering who's inside. It's who we have on the inside there.
No, they just have my personality. No, so yeah, you got to eventually generate cash, and so you got to figure out how to. These systems have to pay back, and very few people seem to want to talk about that, but it's really, really critical. That's the way to stay in business for a long time.
The interesting thing you're talking about with, like, if satellite costs come down, okay, we can build them cheaper and replace them more often, but that is not tied to launch costs at all. So even if you can make the satellites cheaper, you still have to do the math to, like, how can I get these up there? And there was a hot minute when OneWeb was going to buy a bajillion Virgin. No, I was going to say Virgin One. That's not even the name of the company. Virgin Orbit. It was Launcher One, Launcheroni, as I would call it occasionally. They were going to buy 37 of those or something to launch, onesie twosie satellites up, and I never understood that. I'm like, I don't think that math works. Like, make the satellite as cheap as you want. You want to buy 37 of these to fly, single digit satellites for a constellation. I don't really understand that, but there's that aspect too. And is ride sharing the way to get there, where you're going to take the Starship bus up when you've got a whole slew of small sats? All right, that starts to make sense as well, but it is a lot more complicated than just purely how long can my satellite last at the orbit that I'm at, and I'll replace
I'm
it
interested
so
in seeing how Starship will work too. I mean, it's perfectly built for maybe going to the moon and beyond, and perhaps it's great for Starlink if you're launching that many satellites. But it'll be interesting to see if you that's such a big rocket, if you're aggregating lots and lots of small satellites for lots of people. Remember, I mean, we have 6 orbits. Is this thing going to drop us off into different orbits? So you really don't want to be dropping all your satellites at one place in space and then trying to space them out using fuel and all kinds of other stuff. So there's a lot of trade-offs. There will need to be different kinds of rocket types that fit different kinds of missions, and it's good for the industry. I'm fortunate we're not spending a lot of money right now on space, so we're able to generate a lot of money, and that's why we're valuable. But eventually we'll get back around to it. And I know the next time we do this in the 2030s, we're not going to need to do this until 2031 or 2032 probably. But we will probably use smaller satellites. We'll probably have more of them. That will give us a lot more capacity. We know that we think about, 7-8 years from now, a lot of the constellation effort will have generated very low cost buses. It will generate a lot of technology, things like optical crosslinks and optical downlinks, and things that will be a lot less expensive and reliable than they are today. There'll be whatever's in the launch industry, and there's a lot of people still in there, will be cost effective and competitive. So I think it could mean that, our next generation system could be less expensive, more powerful than even the one we have today, which is quite flexible and powerful. So,
do you ever think about, like, it's interesting to hear you say that you want to go smaller, because if you think about something like Starship coming online, like, do you ever consider just we joke about it, we call it the big dumb satellite here, like, just make it bigger because you're using cheap really heavy parts, because it doesn't matter anymore because you have this enormous.
I gotta check where my check from K2 is. I didn't get mine in the mail, Jake.
Yeah, I know. We keep talking about K2 and what they're doing, the big dumb satellites. But I don't know. I'm curious, as another satellite operator, like, have you think about that? Like, if you don't have to do it till the 2030s, like you say, like, this is an opportunity to think differently about the different landscape of rockets than your first constellation, right? Like, you ever think about what you could do to take advantage of that?
Oh yeah, we're spending a lot of time still thinking about it. It's still a number of years away, but that doesn't mean we're not kind of starting the architecture work and the system engineering kind of work to think about what we could do, and also, what other kind of services we can offer, who we might partner with. Very interested in seeing, like, what kind of buses are out there. If people have built 15,000 satellites. I think the 15,001 satellite isn't going to be very expensive to build if we can build off the top of it. And there may be a couple, that have done that.
Mhm.
Again, we're not competitive to most of those people, so they probably would work with us on that. And so you may be restricted to the kinds of the quality of buses, et cetera, that might be available that time. And hopefully they're moving from 5-year to 8 to 10-year kind of cycles, I would hope, as they kind of harden themselves up a bit for, a next generation. But, if you were starting over again, would you make something for 20 or 30 years? I don't know. Things do change in space. And so there is some sweet spot there between longevity and flexibility. And I think that's what, we'll all be looking to try to pick the right spot there that would work for our network in some ways. It's more likely we'll have more satellites next time. 66 obviously we have a highly engineered network. It's one of the reasons why, we're able to be used for all these safety services and why we're able to be put on airliners for that stuff, and why it's just why we're so reliable. And that's what our kind of the hallmark has been. What we need to do then in the next generation is probably have a multiple of that in some way that will have smaller footprints per satellite. That way we can kind of reuse our spectrum even more efficiently and get a lot more capacity out of the network for the next generation. So that's going to be, there's just so many trade-offs we're looking at right now. How do we evolve one network to the next? We've got a lot of time to work on that, but how do we, the last time when we went from a first generation to second generation, not one customer knew it. They were talking to an old satellite versus a new satellite. There wasn't a call dropped. There wasn't a snippet of speech that somebody wasn't on the phone, and they just handed from one satellite to the next. We got some work to do if you're changing architectures from 66 to 66, going to a multiple of that to do that. So we got some things to work on anyway in terms of some interesting design challenges for the next generation.
You got to bring us in when you're going to do the naming, though, because you're saying the word next a lot, and you already painted yourself into that quarter once.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that,
I should have gotten royalties or something there. I don't know. We don't have a name for it, but people, engineers always name stuff. So they made next and they put a little 3 in it, the reverse E.
Yeah, I like that. I'll support that.
If somebody patents that, I guess we'll use that, I guess.
A little bit leet. I like that. Yeah.
A little lead speak, yeah. Okay.
In the one of the most common things that people bring up with deciding where their satellites are going to go is latency, for sure, right? You want to be closer for these very low latency applications. Where you're at, do you feel like latency is not a concern, both in use case, but also altitude that you're at?
Well, we've always been lower latency than the alternatives in L-band, the spectrum that we use and the kind of applications we provide. So we are very low latency for IoT applications, which is the biggest thing we do. So if you're a piece of heavy equipment, and there's something like 170,000 of them that have our system on there, we deliver data very quickly. Clearly, from a voice perspective, if you're talking through our network, it's almost like a cellular system. I don't think it's as much. We're not a primary broadband supplier. We're more of a backup, safety supplier. But it's important, but not everything. But where it really paid off was in like air traffic. We created a venture called Iridium, which tracks every airplane in the world. So every aircraft that is broadcasting its position twice a second, which is almost every airplane now in the world, we're picking up in space 485 miles up and putting it into a massive database, or we're selling that to air traffic controllers. Iridium is, and we're a joint owner of that. And their latency is really, really important. I mean, if you're going to put an airplane on a radar scope and you're going to control it and you keep them close together, you need that in a fraction of a second, not even a second later. So, certain applications really require low latency, and a LEO network like ours is really good for that.
How do you look at the real estate market that is LEO at the moment, though? When you're thinking about constellations and architectures and stuff, right? it feels like a real estate game at this point, where people are either trying to buy up spectrum or buy up certain orbits or certain altitudes, or like you can't really slot in at 535 kilometers right now because there's quite a lot of satellites there. So from the planning perspective, how does that work?
Well, there's no spectrum left. I mean, spectrum's all been allocated. The good stuff. I mean, we were able to get our 30 years ago, but everything in that sweet spot of what's called L or S band spectrum is kind of in someone's hands. So how that gets kind of reallocated and reused, because not everybody's successful in that space. Up in the KUK band, there's still a lot. People are moving to V band and even higher microwave kind of frequencies. So there's room to grow up there.
I found out about E-band recently, and Caleb Henry did not know about E-band either. So I feel like I was validated in that.
You'll have to explain that to me as well, because I don't think I know about E-band either. But but no, I think so. Spectrum is always going to be a challenge for people who want to do what the applications are today, which today is getting into cell phones and really small devices, getting through rain, which K and KU don't do very well. Being able to be a safety services like we are. So that's kind of locked down. The altitudes, I'm not sure is as big a deal, right now. People are going lower mostly because there's just so many satellites, and, hundreds of them have failed already. I mean, Starlink, hundreds of those have failed already, but it's not a big deal because they're so low, they're deorbiting themselves, for the most part. And that's healthy. I'd rather put a little bit more reliable satellite a little higher, and there's a lot of space there. I do get that people go, isn't space all crowded? Didn't you see the pictures? I love how satellites, they make them the size of Rhode Island. And
yeah.
It looks really crowded. But I just even did the math myself because I had to do it for a presentation. And I thought I went from 100 miles up to 1,000 miles up, which is pretty generous for a LEO. And, you just do the math and run the math, and it's like a quadrillion square kilometers up there. It's it's a lot of space. And so when people think that oh my God, these things we're
banging in it's bumper cars. Yeah.
We're flying through the worst of it because some of it's our satellite, ran in.
Don't let the Feng Yang off the hook there. You're up in the weather satellite debris range for sure.
Yeah, we had a SV-33 ran into a Cosmos. Well, Cosmos ran into SV-33 back in 2007, I guess it was. And you
got the dash cam on that?
Yeah. No compensation for it anyway. But when that happened, but even so, our satellites, we're flying through all that stuff, but we only move a satellite once a week, so it's not and that's bumping a satellite. So it's not like this is, oh my God, stuff is flying by us. Starlink's making a lot of movements, but they're even lower, and there's a lot more of their own satellites, but, and they're using, AI and other, or programs to kind of do it automatically. I'm not sure we're real comfortable with that right now. So we probably don't make as many movements because we don't need to, because we think unnecessary movements are as big a problem, for potentially other things too. But there's a lot of space up there, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean it's not a problem, but it's more of a problem for the future, not a problem for today.
Yeah, that's the fact that is it's a truism, but it needs to be said a lot. It's space is really big. It's just really, really big.
If you take all the debris, I think I figured out you could take all the debris. If you could cram it all together, it would fit in like an ocean liner. And just, I mean, one of those big cargo ships. So it's pretty, but you can imagine if it was all in one cargo ship and you send it randomly around the world, you would never see it ever, right? Because it would never go near you where you could see it. But unfortunately, it's all speeding around the world like bullets. And everybody knows that part. And by the way, I just want to make clear, debris is a concern. It is one we are concerned about. We're just more about, we can deal with it through communication, propulsion and movement, coordination, et cetera, and continued good good practices going forward. It's not something I worry sometimes, and the only reason I sort of have a little bit of a talk track on that is that some people have objectives typically when they cry that everything's going to, run into each other, and they're usually selling something, and that's okay, and they should, and I'm glad they're developing the technologies. I just want clear-eyed decisions to be made around new regulations, around things that people have to design to, and that people follow all the rules, but
Yeah.
The funny aspect there too is in those discussions, I feel like it can often, maybe just in internet comment threads, I don't know, it can often come off like, oh, these people that are launching thousands of satellites, like they don't care at all about debris. I'm like, they care the most. They just launched thousands of satellites. If anyone is concerned about satellites falling apart in the sky, it's the people that just launched thousands of satellites. It's
and the
a bit
people
of
are
a self-explanatory situation, but
people are loudest about it, as you know, are geostationary operators, who are not in that belt, but prefer that they're
their
not.
stuff moves a lot slower. So if the debris gets there, it's like a really slow motion catastrophe up there.
I think you don't know how physics works. They are moving pretty fast.
Well, it's relativity. Do you not know? Maybe you don't know how relativity works, Matt. That's what I'm saying.
I've seen a few
I'm
movies.
moving pretty fast right now too, but I'm also drinking this nice white wine.
You're actually moving faster than you were at the beginning of this podcast. I've noticed. I don't know what that is.
So good.
Oh, yeah. Huh. No, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, debris is interesting. It is one of those. Every once in a while, there's like one of those topics where, like, for some reason, we can't have a level-headed conversation about with with a lot of people. It's one of those hot button ones, I guess. But yeah, I know it's interesting to think about the I want to say like the impact of it, because obviously you're right, like the impact is important, but like trying to decide where it crosses the line of like emergency to like just got to pay attention to it. Like there's sometimes I think about like comparing it to like the health of like my own body. Like sometimes there's an emergency, like if I fall and break my arm, I have to go right now to the hospital. And sometimes there's just like I should drink fewer of these, and that's a smarter decision for my health long term. And it's like one is very like urgent and in your face, and one is less so, but maybe more important.
Well, there's a lot of parallels to climate change, and people who are talking about, warming in the 60s and 70s, and we're like, what's the big deal? And of course it started out by being, how hard can it be to be a little bit more careful and start designing around, and then then it became a political issue, and then nobody did anything about it, and then suddenly, we didn't do enough about it because now we're getting tornadoes left and right, and yes, that's not climate, but overall we have to admit there's something going on there, and I wish we could have done practical, low-cost things back in 50 years ago, and I think that's the same way it is right now with space. We can do practical things today, like don't send up satellites that don't have thrusters on them. Actively move, coordinate your moves with everybody else. We unfortunately have two major space powers who don't communicate with anyone about what they're doing in space. That is one of our biggest problems right now. Can't we solve that right now? That's more important than anything.
Yeah.
You're the one sitting closest to the NRO office, Jake and I are out here. I think you can probably see it from your window where you're sitting, Matt.
I didn't want to block the conversation here by, going into world peace and everything here.
You're bringing it all together.
We're not getting that serious here.
We're all about tangents, so this is good. Yeah. Especially when they get serious real fast.
Yeah. We got to tack hard the other direction,
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thinking that one through. That's a hevier one. It's like
I'm still reeling from the accusation that I didn't know how fast geosatellites.
They're not really slow. They just look slow. Okay, they're just far away.
That's what I say too. Okay, about myself out there. Just about relativity. I'm pretty small, so it takes a lot of work to make me look like I'm going fast.
Yeah.
Well, if if large means you look like you're going fast, I must look like I'm just speeding everywhere because I'm definitely at the other end of that. So.
All right, so I want to go back a couple minutes because I was very intrigued by your stated timing of Iridium and where it sits in the life cycle of space. I had not considered the way that you phrased it, and is this a survivorship bias kind of situation? But like where the moments, 90s were the 90s. Let's leave the 90s out of it, but Iridium Next hit at the right moment to get a really great deal to fly on what became the most reliable commercial rocket on the Earth, which at the time you were an outlier for like going, yeah, we're going to go in on this and buy a bunch of them in a single digit year. And now you're going to be on the other end where things have churned. There's going to be a bunch of companies that start up and die before the next time an Iridium satellite is needing to be deployed. So you will presumably kind of ride out this teething phase of gigantic launch vehicles or the crop of small satellite launchers who are growing into big satellite launchers. And, if you're thinking, you were saying like early 2030s is when deployment would happen. So you're probably signing some launch contracts in the late 2020s. What are the...
It's important to say our timeline. We wouldn't start spending any money until the early 2030s, which means that our launch really probably would be the late 2030s. So it's
even better for this
good
hypothetical
15 years from now before we'd even be probably launching, and maybe longer because our constellation is working really, really well and continues to outperform our expectations and everything because we built we didn't build it, but we helped design really, really reliable satellites. I mean, a good example was the recent solar storm. There were a lot of small satellites which were heavily challenged in that, pressured was term, and others, we weren't pressured. In fact, I mean, our systems were built to really, we did have to kind of maneuver our satellites because it's amazing how all that solar just dropped all our satellites, a number of tens or hundreds of meters, but we just popped them right back into orbit over the weekend and stuff. But there was no issues or anything or concerns about that. But and that's one of the things of building a more reliable satellite. But I mean, to the previous thing, I think we're going to be fortunate. Not everyone didn't design this or anything, but I am so happy we got our network up in 2019. Can you imagine trying to launch a network in the middle of a pandemic and all that sort of thing? We went into extended capital phase where we could kind of more exploit our network during the time that we were there. So we were really in a good. So despite the earlier challenges of the company, I'm glad to take a break every now and then here, or get a break every now and then, and another one might be just the windows we're in. We're really good. We're growing nicely. We've already sort of we've given long-term guidance. I mean, as a public company, it's unusual, but we've described how, we're going to go from the current state up to like $1 billion in service revenue by 2030. And we feel confident with all the things we're doing right now and the activities, we just made an acquisition, et cetera. All those things are, and then we might start spending some money on the next generation network. And that's going to work out, I think, really well in terms of timing of the industry right now, I think we're going through cycles and we're just we'll hit the next cycle just right, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right to me because this is a terrible time to try to buy launch vehicles. It's like, number one, none left because Amazon bought all the big ones. There's a bunch of little ones that have decided they should be big ones. None of those are flying yet and don't look to be in the next, 2 or 3 years. So you're going to be at a time where, like, presumably Neutron has a couple flights under its belt. New Glenn, I assume, will have a bunch of launches under its belt. Who knows what's going to happen with Relativity? I'm less up on their plans than others may be, but there's just so much chaos right now that seems like it will shake out by that time. And I feel like we get stuck, when we talk about things on this show or other shows, that we get stuck on looking at this like 2 to 5 year range. But when you cast your mind forward as if I'm somebody who, like, I've never put myself in your brain space of I'm watching now so I can buy in 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. That's a different way to think about of like where you might apply your interest and which things seem the most likely to be flourishing by then or be, fit for the architecture by then. It's just a different way to look at what everyone's working on these days.
And that's focused on launch. But one thing I don't think people appreciate is, and I tip my hat to Motorola at the time, and maybe it was because of their telecom experience and other things, but when they designed the first generation system with Lockheed Martin buses and Raytheon panels and all that kind of stuff, they built at its heart a software defined system, a software programmable system. That was not that is not how geostationary satellites were at the time. Things were pre-programmed, put up in space, and then 15 to 20 years later, through an evolution of time, you would launch another every year or something like that, and you would constantly be going through generations over time of these hardware-defined satellites. When we launched our second generation system, it was even more programmable. So we're not sitting doing nothing during that time, waiting till 2030s. I mean, we're reprogramming a whole standard system into our satellites through something we call Stardust, this narrowband IoT standard, which will allow us to connect to low-cost IoT devices and maybe, smartphones and watches and things like that. That couldn't have been done, 10, 15 years ago because nobody built a satellite to do that. But we have people now reprogramming our system. And so that's why you don't have to build something every 5 years. You can build something longer lasting that's very flexible, and that's what we have.
It turns your satellites into assets with APIs rather than services themselves, right? And then you build the service down on the ground, and you can change that whenever you want, as long as you're sending the bits up and down in the same format, then you're good, right? So.
No, exactly. And, we're changing the satellites in space in real time, and we're changing the ground infrastructure that talks to them. I mean, we do still have a very unique network, and it's all interconnected in space. And so, we have a lot of flexibility to manage these satellites remotely, et cetera. So.
The current moment in time in the satellite industry is a lot of consolidation from people that were working in different orbits before, buying people in different orbits and having these like multi-orbit setups and all that. And you've talked about how you feel like Iridium fits in alongside Starlink and Kuiper and some of the other competitors. But are there things going on in the consolidation end that you're watching as like this could be a threat to us, or do you kind of file it all away and feel like you are unique enough that stuff doesn't really bother you?
Well, when you're CEO of any company, much less a satellite company, you stay paranoid all the time. And so you're always looking at everybody and trying to think about what it could do. But really, knowing sort of where things are going and everything, we're in a very unique space, no pun intended. We often call it our lane. And nobody seems to want to get in our lane. It's too nichey. It's too small, perhaps, or whatever. So people don't seem to be coming more into things to do what we do really well as effectively. And to the extent that they have, we've kind of responded in kind with something that's better, than what they're able to do. So I think I can't look out 20 years and say for sure that it won't be that way, but I can certainly look out with a lot of confidence over this next 7 or 8 years to 2030. And few companies are able to do that. I mean, that is the one good thing about space. It's very expensive. It's capital intensive. It takes a while to get your network in, but nothing comes at you very fast. It's like I remember that old comedy routine where look, the old guy with a knife, but he's traveling so slowly. Look out for me. I'm coming, any day now. I'm going to get there. I mean, and so you really see things from far off, and you really know what's going to, where things are going, and people can't move that fast. They have either certain kind of spectrum assets, they have certain kind of technical abilities, they have, assets in space or whatever it might be. And so we kind of know where things are going. So I do see the consolidation. Almost all the consolidation right now is focused on that commodity broadband space, KUK suppliers. I think that's smart. They all need to do that because Starlink is eating their lunch, and and they got to get bigger and have more flexibility, whether it was Viasat buying Inmarsat or SES buying Intelsat. There's still probably some more to go, because that's still a tough space with the disruption that Starlink has caused all of them. But in our area, there's not many people kind of left. We out-survived everybody with a better product and a better service that was, more global and, smaller and all that sort of thing. And nobody went and acquired and went to build to kind of compete with us. There will be, as I said, there'll be some competition in the distant future around the edges of us, like in this whole area of direct-to-device where people, but right now, no one sort of has the money and ability to build a global system in space. There's people who aspire to it, and that would be a bit more competitive, but it's going to take a long time to build that, and it would be a very expensive thing to do. The solutions today are pretty much regional. It's a T-Mobile Starlink system or something, or an AT&T Verizon AST Space Mobile. And to the extent those things work well, and they eventually probably will, they're going to be very, very regional. And that's not, again, what we do. People don't buy one of our devices, as I said, in Wyoming to use in rural Colorado. That just isn't, we're more something you buy in the U.S. to go take with you when the hurricane hits, in the Caribbean or in South America, or, first responders, or it's an aviation thing that has to be across the whole planet, or it's a ship that travels the whole world. And, there's what, 250,000 ships with our system on it. It's D2D isn't going to help those things. There's 70,000 aircraft systems. That's not going to be those sort of systems. 2 million IoT devices, that's going to grow dramatically over that time. So it's a very different thing. It's hard to explain that publicly. Most people don't have the knowledge that you guys do, or your listeners probably do, about space, and can appreciate how spectrum is different and regulations different, all that kind of stuff. But, so as a public company, we kind of suffer a little bit because we're sort of niche-y. Well, they see our success and growth and cash flow and all that stuff. They don't quite appreciate why LEO doesn't mean everything in LEO just competes with itself,
Right. So you're saying that the Iridium stock's on sale, then we can get a good deal on it.
I think it's a good deal, but I think I can say that.
Well,
maybe that's the beer talking. My general counsel isn't near here. I don't.
That's what we like to do on the show. Wait till the last 2 minutes and then ask a staff question. Yeah. You have to do the whole clause, safe harbor, forward-looking statements, blah, 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 when you talk.
Anything I said forward-looking is please take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah. You did talk about the 2030s, so I feel like if that's already out there, then you're good.
Well, I don't know where I'll be in the 2035 timeframe. You can catch me
on a distant island using some Iridium phone to call into this show.
Exactly.
Near where Jake lives, I guess.
Near where, yeah. Perfect. Cool.
So, by the way, I heard a question you wanted to ask me, and you can't get away without, and that's about X-wing fighters and in the Air and Space Museum. I don't think you talked about that.
Oh man. Okay. Wow. Someone did their homework, so that's really good. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to see what this show was all about, and so I scrolled right to the end, and I see there. I got to talk to them about this X-wing fighter across from my One World Connected exhibit. But
all I'll say is I've put out some comments about this, and I received at least one email from somebody who works in and around the National Air and Space Museum, and they were also not thrilled with the existence of the X-wing fighter hanging in the main area, and so I feel validated, and I will be even more staunch
if we moved it somewhere else in the museum. Because I will say, as somebody who's been a big fan of the Air and Space Museum, for a long time, and I think you guys are too, because it is a national treasure. I can't wait for the grand opening of all the rest of the exhibits, because it's still not completed yet, but that'll happen by the end of next year. So And I'll tell you, that is one of the most kids, 6-year-old kids absolutely love that exhibit. And I think they're the future aerospace engineers. And if they kind of can make a connection in some ways and be inspired by it. I mean, what museums really are is about, imagination and inspiration. And so, I mean, I think that's what it's all about. I know you old guys like us can get real old school and say it has to be something that flew exactly, but
No, listen. All I'm saying is,
for sure that didn't fly. I saw a guy flying it. I don't know what you're talking
I do
about.
love Poe Dameron. He is one of my favorites. My almost 4-year-old does love the shit out of X-wings. He absolutely loves X-wings and wants everything to be an X-wing. So I'm not going to fight that. But the reasoning I find to be bullshit. To be frank, I think the reasoning I saw was that, well, these are there's the Enterprise model that's like near where the door you come in right now is. That these are the things that were like the spark for the people that went and built the spaceships. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like most of this stuff in this museum, like the X-Wing was downstream of most of the stuff in this museum. That there were an X-15, an Apollo capsule, and like, am I weird, or did the Star Wars come out in the 70s and that was downstream of the entire goddamn space race? So like, I just found that this is an inverse.
You don't know
relationship.
that. I don't know in the pantheon of 9 Star Wars movies where that was. That could have been 1,000 years ago because I don't see Earth there anymore.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I'm sure before all that stuff.
All right, we'll have to come back down and we'll argue about this in person sometime. And I can,
I would appreciate that. Give you a personal tour anyway here. So
I'm coming back when the rest is open for sure. Because my son is pretty mad that he's been in Skylab before when he was a baby, but he wanted to go back in it. And he was sad that part was not open yet. So he was mad at me personally that part was not open yet. And so now I need to go right that wrong. So
there's an awful lot of stuff that needs to get displayed, and get out to Udvar Hazy too, because it's an awesome museum as well. I mean, it's and I've even been to the back lot. It looks like that movie, Indiana Jones and stuff, because there's so much stuff in boxes that they can't even put out there, which is pretty cool. I mean,
all right, we got to get a tour of that, Jake. All the stuff that's
I remember looking when we were at Udvar Hazy last time. I remember there was one part of the tour where there was a window into the back room, and you're right,
the
there was just like
hangar.
pallets and pallets of crates of stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, there's like a Mars rover back here, and like a bunch of stuff. So yeah,
well, our Block 1 satellite, our first generation satellite is hanging in the One World Connected, and got to see it back there being restored as they were. I have to say, when I joined Iridium in 2006, it wasn't where it is today, let's just say. And, I went downtown. My wife hadn't moved to DC yet. And I'm standing there looking at the exhibit. And I just remember it said, Iridium, Iridium was the first low Earth orbiting satellite system. And it went bankrupt. And I thought, I just joined this company. That's all it said. I mean, that's all it said. And, it took us a few years to convince them to say, and it lives today. I mean, they tack that on the bottom, but I'm glad to see that we've evolved now, and they put us more as a historical reference anyway for the first Leo satellite. But and I was happy now people know what we are and everything, and not the guy in front of me who goes, I remember Iridium. Yeah. My brother-in-law worked on it, and then they walked on, and I thought, I'm CEO of this company. I hope to make it something that you might recognize in a few years from now. So it's been 18 years from that. We're a little different place.
Love it. All right. Well, we got a date then. Off-Nom meetup in 2026 to tour guide.
Honestly, yes.
Matt Desch.
Please
we'll hire you.
That'll be love awesome. To have you. Yeah.
Love it. Okay.
Awesome. Great. Matt, this has been great. We're going on a tour of space executives, Jake.
We are, yeah.
Next week, Peter Beck is going to be on the show. I think for real this time, because they already announced their earnings. So I think that we're not going to get screwed up by announcement cycles or something. Maybe that was the problem last time.
To a fine New Zealand Pilsner, I'm sure, of some sort.
Something like that. Yeah, I don't know what. Yeah, actually, I'm curious about what that'll be. That'll be.
We'll find out.
It could be your drink would be seasonally correct down there though.
It would be. I don't think he would drink this one, though, to be honest with you. I'm pretty sure this is not
Maybe not. Yeah.
the one that he would be looking at.
The wrong letters on that one for sure. Yeah.
All right, y'all. Thanks for
Right.
hanging out.
Thanks, everybody.
We will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, Rob.